Go. I'm Jency Brown from University College, and one of my roles in University College is to oversee general education. We don't decide in University College which courses get on the Gen Ed lists, but we have input into that process. And then we're the place where students come if they have questions about general ed, if they don't understand how it works. We hope advisors out in the departments can help explain that too, but sometimes there are difficult, unusual questions, and so feel free to contact us anytime you have an unusual Gen Ed question come up, whether it be a U of U course or a transfer course. We are also the place students can come to get exceptions or substitutions made for Gen Ed. If they have a course that doesn't initially count, but they think it should, they'll come and talk to us, and we have an appeal process that they can go through. So we're going to talk more about that as we go through the presentation. We're going to look at the undergrad bulletin because there's a lot of information on general ed, especially placement for things like the math and the writing that's in the undergrad bulletin. We're going to talk about all of the general ed and bachelor's degree requirements, and that's an important distinction. Together, those courses are called university graduation requirements, but part of them are referred to as general education, and part of them are referred to as bachelor's degree requirements. And we'll talk more about why that distinction as we get a little further along. Again, math and writing placement. Also a big question at the U for new students is how their AP is going to count, because lots of our students come in with AP credits. Also questions about CLEP, questions about the IB diploma, the International Baccalaureate diploma that can fill some Gen Ed for some of our students. So at any point along the way, if you have a question, feel free to stop me and we will move along. But remember, University College is your place to go if you have a question come up. And you could start, if you've got contact with a particular advisor in our office that you work with all the time, you're certainly welcome to call them, but you can also call our main number and just ask for the quick answer advisor. And a lot of times that advisor at the quick answer desk can either help you on the spot, or if it sounds like it's going to take an appointment, then they can facilitate getting an appointment. We don't want to have students come over and have an appointment if it's a simple question we can just handle on the phone, and a lot of times that's the case. So when students first come into the U, they're required to do an orientation. A lot of them meet with us in University College, and at that point we explain the general ed. There's also a presentation at orientation where they explain the Gen Ed requirements. So students initially get an explanation, but a lot of times there's so much information given to them at the beginning that it doesn't all sink in. So they may continue to have questions about Gen Ed as they progress through their first year or two at the university. We hope by the time they get into their second year, they've got it all figured out. We also sometimes have students come in and say they want to get all their Gen Ed done right up front. They seem to think there's some advantage to doing all their Gen Ed at the beginning. And that's not really the case at all. Now, if they're undecided, of course, Gen Ed is a good way for them to start working on those courses, getting those requirements while they explore majors. But if they've got a pretty good idea about what they want to major in, then the appropriate way, I feel, to approach Gen Ed is to mix it in each year a little bit at a time so that they're getting it done as they progress towards their major. The exception to that is writing and math. Those two pieces of Gen Ed, we like to see freshmen get right up front. And if a transfer student comes in and doesn't have the writing or math complete, try to get them to do that right away, because they need those courses for all the other courses they're going to be taking. And the worst feeling in the world is when you get a student who's a senior and they haven't completed particularly math, and it's been 4 or 5 years since they did any math, and so we really push, do that math early on, get it done so you don't have it hanging over your head. And of course, a big tool that we have for helping students understand Gen Ed is the DARS report. Now, the worksheet that you have for Gen Ed on page 10 of the bulletin, and then the blue one that I gave you, which is very similar, follows the steps that are on the DARs for going through Gen Ed. I like to use this worksheet initially with students alongside the DARs because I think it sometimes helps to take the information off the DARs and put it on the worksheet, and in doing that they get a better understanding about all the requirements. But the DARS by itself does a very good job of showing the Gen Ed what's required, which courses or tests they've taken that fill the various requirements. So you can see on the worksheet there are really several components to a degree. The first we call academic standards. Those are just the minimum requirements that any student must meet. You have to have at least a 2.0 GPA to graduate, and in some majors the requirement's higher than that. You have to have at least 122 semester hours. Some of those can be transfer hours, some of those can be test hours, but the combination has to add up to actually 121.5 or more. They'll round up to 122. And it's amazing how many students are trying to graduate right on the button with 122. You know, they don't want to go 1 hour over if they can help it, which is okay, but it also can create some problems if for some reason at the end they're 1 hour short. And it's amazing how many times you'll have a student come in and for some reason they weren't paying close attention and now they need 1 credit hour, and that's a rule that is never waived. You have to have 121.5 or more to graduate. 40 of those, or again 39.5 or higher, they'll round up to 40, have to be upper division courses. And those at the University of Utah and all the state schools in Utah are courses 3,000 and above, count toward upper division. If it's out-of-state work, they have to have those hours evaluated by the admissions office to determine which transfer hours are upper division. And if it's international work, then it really gets sticky because a lot of international schools don't number courses the same way we do. So it's best if they've got transfer credit they feel should count towards upper division to get that taken care of as soon as they can, so there's no question about what's upper division and what's not. And then there's that good old residency requirement that you see mentioned there on the worksheet. And that rule is that you have to do at least 30 hours at the university to get a degree here. We're not going to give you a degree that says University of Utah if you don't do at least some minimum amount of work here. And the part that confuses people is 20 of your last 30 hours have to be done at the U. And the way I like to think of that is when you get to your last 30 hours, you can't transfer in any more than 10 hours of your last 30. So I think that's the easier way to remember it. No more than 10 hours of your last 30 can be transferred in. Sometimes it gets tricky, which hours are exactly your last 30. Sometimes the graduation office will make an exception and allow a student to go a little bit over the 10. But it's best if they just don't plan on transferring in any more than 10 hours of their last 30. Where we run into that the most is a case of where a student was close to being done with a degree and got a job opportunity or some kind of a family situation forced them to move, and now they're trying to finish their last hours out of state and they want to take courses at a transfer school and transfer them back to the U. So that's primarily where we see issues with that requirement. So that's the academic standards part. You can see the part on the worksheet that's Gen Ed, the part that's bachelor's degree requirements. We're going to go over that in a lot of detail here. And then finally, the major requirements. We're not going to cover those here because that's what each major advisor does. And our job in University College is to connect students with their proposed major as soon as they have an idea, and then the major advisor takes over on those requirements. Sometimes there can be some overlap, though, between major requirements and Gen Ed, and many times there's overlap between major requirements and bachelor's degree requirements. In fact, some majors have all the bachelor's degree requirements built right into the major, which is always nice for the student when that's all built right in.
I had a student that asked if she were to do a study abroad at the end of her year, it's still residency hours, right? But it's just a study abroad.
Yeah, with the study abroad, we want to make sure that everything is clear up front, so there aren't any surprises when the student completes it and comes back. If it is a study abroad through the University of Utah and it's recognized as University of Utah coursework, then it counts as residency hours. But not all study abroads are that way. Some are looked at as transfer work, and so if that's the case, we could still probably get the graduation office to not count those against a student's 10 hours, but we'd want to make sure we clarified that up front.
If they go through the University of Utah study abroad program or department and get those approved, are they residency hours?
Well, again, if it's a U of U study abroad, and the courses are going on the transcript as University of Utah courses, then there's no problem at all. But our study abroad office does help students arrange study abroad, or actually the new term is learning abroad. I have a hard time remembering that too, but learning abroad. They will help students arrange programs where the work comes in as transfer work. So if it is going to come in as transfer work, then we would want to check, first of all, is it going to be in their last 30? And then we'd go to the graduation office and say, look, will you give them a waiver because this is something that their program wants them to do? And the graduation office is pretty flexible in cases like that. It's usually not a problem.
You need to clarify that with them.
Yeah, and they are supposed to get all that approval done before they ever leave to go on the Learning Abroad program. The other thing, any Learning Abroad program will clear the university's international requirement. So that's a nice bonus they get by doing one of those. Okay, we already covered the academic standards part of the requirements. So let's look at general education. And the first requirement on the list is called American Institutions. It's actually a requirement mandated by the state of Utah that all students have one of these courses. What they have in common is that they are a look at U.S. history, government. The idea is to foster responsible citizenship among our students, and so having a knowledge of our American history and our political system. And so it's a pretty short list to pick from. They have courses in different departments, but that doesn't mean that any economics course or any history course or any poli-sci course will fill the American Institutions. It's just that particular course that you see on the list. Econ 1740, Poli-Sci 1100, History 1700, and then there's an honors version. Where this creates some issues is with transfer work, because many times a student will take a history course at another school and it'll be American history from Revolutionary War period up to the Civil War. That by itself will not fill the AI requirement. It has to be both halves of American history. If they do a course that is half of American history, have to have the other half. We have a pair of courses like that in the history department that history majors take to fill the AI requirement. So they do 2 courses. But everybody else picks one of these, and sometimes they pick one that counts for their major. If they're an econ major, they're supposed to do Econ 1740, and so it counts for the major and it counts as AI. Poli-sci majors are supposed to do Poli-sci 1100, so it counts for the Poli-sci major and it counts for AI. And that is a good place to mention there is a minimum grade of D- or credit for these if a student's using them just for Gen Ed. But anytime a student is using a course both for Gen Ed and to meet a major requirement, that major may have a higher standard, and it's usually a C or a C- for a major. So a poli-sci major would not be able to use a D- towards his major, even though it would fill the Gen Ed requirement. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And also, normally, major courses cannot be taken credit, no credit. So if they're just using it for Gen Ed, they can do it credit, no credit, but if they're doing it also for a major requirement, they have to take it for a letter grade. Writing. That's where there are some issues with placement when students come in, and in the undergrad bulletin on page 12, there is a writing placement guide that you should keep. The thing I like to do with the undergrad bulletin is just keep it real handy, so when I'm meeting with a student, if I can't remember all the details about writing placement, I can just grab this and I know right where to look very quickly. Most students who come into the university as new freshmen, there is a placement determined by the admissions office which places them either into writing 1010 or writing 2010. 2010 is the one that fills the lower division writing requirement. We refer to it by the symbol WR2 in the class schedule and on the worksheet. And most of our students qualify to come in and do that course as their first writing course. But some of our students who aren't as strong writers place into writing 1010, and they have to do 1010 and then 2010 to fill the lower division writing requirement. There is another version of writing 2010. It's 2011, which is the same course, but it's specifically for students in the LEAP program. So no real difference in the course other than it's tied to LEAP. There is an honors version of writing. And then international students also have to do a placement when they come in, and they normally place into the ESL series of courses. They'll place either into ESL 1040 or 1050. And then to fill the requirement, they have to go up through ESL 1060. So some international students will have to do 3 courses to fill the requirement, 1040, 1050, 1060. Some will place into 1050 and only have to do 1050 and 1060. There is no way they can place directly into 1060. So they have to do at least 2.
But if they complete the 1060, then they don't have to do the 2010.
Correct. Yeah, the 1060 takes the place of the 2010 in the lower division writing. And if they're not happy with their placement, they can take a placement essay, try to place higher than they are. All right, everybody's favorite requirement is the math requirement. That seems to be the one that causes our students the most grief. However, since the math department has instituted a very strict policy of prerequisite enforcement, I think we're seeing less problems with math. We hear a lot of moaning and groaning because they don't want to take as many courses as they're required. But before we had prerequisite enforcement, so many students would start too high and end up doing poorly and having to go back and repeat courses. And so we've taken away a lot of that. I think we're doing a much better job of getting students placed correctly. We use ACT or SAT scores for initial placement. However, test scores in general are only good for 2 years. So if a student's ACT or SAT are over 2 years old, they're going to have to do the AccuPlacer math placement test to get a placement score. There are 2 parts to the math requirement, the lower division math requirement. We refer to them as QA and QB, quantitative reasoning part A, quantitative reasoning part B. And on page 13 of the undergrad bulletin, there's a math placement guide for QA. And so when a student comes in, if their math skills are pretty weak, they may place into Math 990, which is a non-credit review course. It's one of the only courses at the U that we offer that is below 1,000. And so it is considered to be a remedial course. Now, if a student is struggling at the 990 level, they can go down to Salt Lake Community College. And Salt Lake Community College actually has 2 or 3 levels below 990, so a student can really go back and start at the basics and work their way up if they need to. But 990 is the lowest one that we offer, and even though it doesn't count for credit, they still get a grade, and they have to get a C or higher in 990 to move up to 1010. And that's the case with each math course. To move up, they have to have a C or higher to move to the next level. Probably more of our students place into 1010 than any other level. We see lots of our new freshmen placing into 1010, intermediate algebra. But some place right into one of the courses that will fill QA, and there are several. Math 1030, 1090, 1050, 1060, 1080 are all courses that will fill QA. And at that level, it depends what major they're considering as to which of those courses they should take to fill QA. 1030 is just called Methods of Quantitative Reasoning, and it's designed for students who have no need to go on and do any higher math in their major, like maybe English or history. There's not higher math required, so 1030 becomes their terminal math course. 1050 is the traditional college algebra. I don't think it's really any different in difficulty than 1030, but it is designed for students who are going to go on to higher math, and some majors require 1050 as opposed to 1030. 1090 is actually very similar to 1050. It's algebra, but it's more geared for business majors. So students going into business or economics could take 1090, but they could also take 1050. The majors will accept that. 1060 is trig. So a student going on to calculus would need both algebra and trig, 1050 and 1060. We do have a few students who just take trig because they had a little bit of it in high school and they liked it better than algebra, and it's kind of a different type of math, so some students seem to click better with trig than algebra. And then 1080 is a fairly new course that actually combines both algebra and trig. The engineering majors push to get that course developed because it helps potential engineering students get on to calculus sooner. So instead of having to do 1050 and 1060, they can just do 1080 and move into calculus. Any calculus course will clear QA, and it will also clear QB. So calculus clears QA and QB with one calculus course.
But they couldn't test right into calculus, could they?
They could place directly into calculus by doing AP. They could not place into calculus with, let's see, we have a list of their placement scores, and you see on the left side of page 13, ACT placement. They can place directly into calculus with their ACT or SAT scores if they have a very high score. So just like with writing, if they're not happy with their initial placement, they can take a placement test. It's called the AccuPlacer. The testing center here at the university offers it. They have a very detailed website that gives students the opportunity to work some placement or some practice problems and practice tests. And many students take that and do improve their placement.
Do we use the ACT score for writing as well, or do we take
No, do we use the ACT score for writing? Sort of. The admissions office has a formula they use. It's not strictly ACT or SAT. It's not strictly GPA. It's some kind of a formula they use to determine writing placement. So it's not as obvious how the writing placement is determined as it is with the math placement. All right, so that's QA. QB is statistics or logic, and that is actually a requirement that many majors have built in. Many of our majors have their own statistics course that is required as part of the major. If there is not a course in the major, then students can go into the class schedule And at the very top of the class schedule, one of the links is to all the different gen ed and bachelor's degree requirements. And they can pull up a list of QB courses. There are probably 30, maybe 40 courses on that list. And many of them are some sort of a statistics course. There are a few through the math department. Math 1040 and Math 1070 are the two lower level statistics courses offered through the math department. But many majors have their own stats, like psychology, sociology, have statistics specifically for that major. And then for students who really don't want to do statistics, there are several logic courses through the philosophy department. There's a communication course that's on the list. So there are some options there that they can take if there's not one built right into their major. So that's QA, QB. Now, if they take a course like calculus that clears both QA and QB, you may see the designation QR. QR is the abbreviation used for a course that clears both requirements. The next part of general education is what we refer to as intellectual explorations. And students are required to do 2 courses in at least 3 of the 4 IE. I'll use the letters IE for intellectual explorations. They have to do at least 3 of the 4 areas. Normally, a student will be exempt from the area that their major falls in. But of course, if they don't know what their major is, they don't know which area they're exempt from, and they may end up doing courses in all 4 areas. This is a good way for students to explore majors by taking some of the IE courses in majors they have an interest in. And so we encourage those undecided students to spend some time. Again, you can go into that link on the class schedule and pull up a list of all the fine arts courses. You can pull up a list of all the humanities courses. There's actually 2 lists in the physical life and applied science area. One list is the physical and life science courses, and a second list is the applied science courses. And students can take 1 off of each list, or they can take 2 off the physical and life science list. The only thing they can't do is they can't take 2 applied courses. Only one of the 2 can be an applied course. And then they can also pull up the social and behavioral science. That's the one, it's social and behavioral science, but the abbreviation is BF for behavioral science. And if you take some time to look at those lists, you'll see there are literally hundreds of courses on there. In fact, one of the problems we have is that there's so many choices that it can be overwhelming. But I think it's a good thing for students because they can really look and find something that applies to their interests, something they want to take. And it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with their major. It's an opportunity to broaden out and get some exposure in areas that they have an interest in. So FF, Fine Arts, when you look at the Fine Arts list, you're going to see there are courses in art, but there are also courses in architecture, music, theater, dance, film studies, just a whole host of different departments have courses in the fine arts area. Humanities is probably the longest list with courses in history and philosophy and classical civilization and just a huge number of courses to pick from. Some of the courses are lower division that are appropriate for new freshmen. Some are upper division where a brand new freshman might at least want to check with the professor before they jump into a upper division course. Probably better for them to wait till they've got a little bit of college under their belt before they take those upper division courses. Physical life and applied science, we have some students who kind of groan when they hear that, but when you look at the list, there are courses in chemistry and biology and physics, but there are also things like foods and nutrition and common medicines and earthquakes and volcanoes, and there's one called severe and unusual weather that I would probably take if I were a student. And then social and behavioral science. Again, a huge list of courses in psychology, sociology, political science, economics, lots of different departments. In helping students, the main thing you want to look for is if the course has the appropriate designation so that you know it is approved to count for Gen Ed. And so the FF code tells you there's no doubt it's a fine arts. Those are what we call requirement designations. And all of those courses that have a requirement designation have gone before a faculty committee, been reviewed, and been approved for general education. If it doesn't have the requirement designation, it's not been approved. So students should always be encouraged to take something off the approved list. Again, for Gen Ed purposes, minimum grade of a D- will fill the requirement, or they can take the course credit, no credit. In some cases, they're taking a course that also counts toward a major, and then the major standard applies. For example, a art major is required to do art history 2500 as one of their major requirements. Well, that's a humanities Gen Ed course, so the student's going to fill a Gen Ed requirement, but the art department's going to require them to have the C and a letter grade for that. Okay, well, before we move on to bachelor's degree requirements, do you have any questions about the general ed part of the requirements? Now, when a student transfers in with an associate's degree from a in-state USHE school, Utah System of Higher Ed school, or with a letter of completion from one of those schools, all of the Gen Ed is automatically cleared. It's an agreement between the state schools that it comes in as a package. Even though it may not match up course by course, we clear it. The admissions office will take care of clearing that. And it'll say right on their DARS report, cleared with associate's degree or cleared with letter of completion. If it's from an out-of-state school, then the intellectual explorations and the writing are automatically cleared, but we have to look to see if the student took an American history course, and we have to look to see how much math they did. So those are not automatically cleared with an out-of-state associate degree. The bachelor's degree requirements are not automatically cleared by any transfer degree. So students have to come to University College to have us take a look at their prior work to see which of those requirements may be filled. The one exception to that is the diversity requirement. We do have an arrangement with Salt Lake Community College where their diversity courses are automatically coded to clear diversity here. But other than that one exception, we have to look in University College to determine, and that's where a phone call from you might be appropriate. If you see a transfer course and it is just obviously an upper division writing course from its title, from what you're seeing, you could call us and we could probably just take care of that with a phone conversation rather than having the student come over.
I was going to say the math would clear the QA with the letter of completion or the associate's degree. With the QB, they still probably have to do.
No, it will clear it for Gen Ed purposes, but if their major requires that they do a QB for the major, then they'd have to satisfy that major requirement. They may end up doing another QB course once they get here, depending on what they have in their transfer work. So as we look at the bachelor's degree requirements, the minimum grades for these are a little higher, C-. But again, if it's a course they're taking for their major, what you'll find with some majors around the university, a C- is acceptable to fulfill a major requirement. Some of them want a C. So it varies a little bit from major to major. Upper division communication writing. It has to be an upper division course. And again, when you look at that list on our class schedule, there's a very extensive list of courses. Many, many majors have either their own course that fills this or a recommended course for students to take. They all have the CW attribute. If a student is transferring in a course, it has to be upper division. And so here's where we've run into some problems over the years. A student will transfer into a major here at the university, and that major has a CW course in their requirements, and they'll look at the transfer work and they will decide to take a lower division course to waive the requirement within their major. Sometimes the students think, well, that automatically means it will also clear the bachelor's degree CW requirement, and it will not. That has to be upper division. We're not allowed to make any exceptions to that rule. It's what we feel distinguishes a university from a community college, and so the upper division status is considered very highly. And if another school has determined that course is lower division, then it is lower division in our minds. Now, of all the bachelor's degree requirements, the diversity requirement is the one where there's the most flexibility. It can be a lower division course, as is evidenced by the fact that we accept Salt Lake Community College's diversity courses. Those are all lower division. When you look at our list at the U of U, you'll see about 50-50. About half of them are upper division, about half of them are lower division. Some majors have diversity courses built right into the major requirements. Economics, for example, has several diversity courses within the economics offerings. So a student could take an economics course and also clear diversity with that. Diversity can be double counted with a gen ed course. So there are fine arts diversity courses like Survey of Jazz. There are many humanities diversity courses. There are many social and behavioral science diversity courses. There are no diversity courses in the physical, life science, and applied science area. But in the other three areas, there are courses that can be double counted. And boy, students consider you to be their best friend when you show them a course they can take and clear 2 requirements with 1 course. When you look at the course attributes, and I'd encourage you to go back and when you get to your computer, pull up the class schedule and look at some of those courses. You'll see DV, HF, and that clears diversity and humanities. And if you click on that DVHF, it'll come up and it'll say diversity and humanities. And that's what tells you it's a double counter. Where we get confused is you'll also see FFHF. And when you click on the FFHF, it'll say fine arts or humanities. There are no courses that can clear more than 1 IE area with a single course. There are some that can count one place or another. And so because of the way the abbreviations are, the or and the and don't show up till you click on that requirement designation. Then it gives you the greater detail and you can see whether it's an or whether it's an and. And when it's plugged into DARS, it's obvious too, because it'll only count for 1 in some cases, or in other cases it will count for 2. With the intellectual exploration courses that are courses that can count one place or another, the DARS will put them where it thinks they should go, but the student could opt to change that if the course is plugged in to count for humanities, but it's one that can also count for fine arts. We could switch it over and make it count in the other area if need be. The next requirement is actually our newest requirement. It's called the international requirement. It is strictly upper division. Again, many majors have their own IR course, and as we talked at the beginning, a study abroad or a learning abroad program will clear the international requirement as long as it's something that goes on a transcript. That's the key. We'll have students who come in all the time and say, well, I spent 10 years in Costa Rica. Shouldn't that count? Well, it's a wonderful experience, but it has to be on the transcript for it to fill this requirement. So, again, with transfer courses, they may have the same title, they may have the same textbook, but if they're a transfer course that's lower division, we can't use them to clear IR at the U. This is another one that can be double counted, and there are courses in all 4 of the IE areas that will double count for international. One of the most popular ones in the fine arts area is called world music. There is one in the nutrition department that counts in the science area called cultural aspects of food. And if you walk through the hyper at the right time of day when that course is going on, you'll smell some of the cultural aspects of food, because I actually prepare food in the class and sample it, and so it's a pretty cool course. That's one I'd probably take if I was back in school. But courses in lots of different areas and very relevant topics. And we've had some issues with that requirement because it actually went on the books in the fall of '07, but any student who started before then was grandfathered in and not required to do that requirement, and they graduated by summer of '13. Well, guess what just came up recently? The summer of '13 passed, and we had some students who were caught off guard because they didn't realize they were suddenly going to become held to finish that requirement. And so we've had some petitions and appeals, and some cases we were able to find a course a student took before that would work. But it is now a requirement for any student, no matter when they started at the U. They have to do the international requirement. And anytime we add a new requirement, we give students typically 6 or 7 years to complete before they're held to it, if they were already here before the requirement started. So it's not like we spring things on people at the last minute and change the rules on them. We try to give them plenty of time. Then the last part of the bachelor's degree requirements varies depending on whether a student is doing a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science. And some of our majors are Bachelor of Science. They're held to 2 upper division quantitative courses. Many majors have their own courses that will fill these. Again, they have to be upper division. They are quantitative, so you'll see statistics and research methods types of courses. If they're doing a Bachelor of Arts, they have to do a language. They have to do at least the 4th semester of a language. The 4th semester course is the one that fills the requirement. And there is a language placement guide in the undergrad bulletin on page 12. So we have students who have had high school background and can take a placement test to determine where they start. We'll have students who have gone on experiences in other countries, and they'll come back and take a proficiency test. And so not every student has to start from the very beginning 10-10 course and do all 4. There are some different ways they can meet that language requirement. And they only have to do the language if they're doing a BA, Bachelor of Arts. But of course, in this day and age, I encourage any student who's got an interest to do a second language, whether they have to or not. There are a couple of special degrees, Bachelor of Fine Arts, Bachelor of Music, that don't have to do the BS or the BA. They're exempt from it, and if you run a DARS for those majors, it won't even show the BS or the BA. The undergrad bulletin has an extensive guide on page 11 to what AP tests we accept and what they count for. And students, many of our students bring in AP work with them when they come in as freshmen. Concurrent enrollment is like transfer work. They have to have a transcript sent and get that posted, and in some cases that concurrent enrollment fills gen ed requirements. Students sometimes take CLEP tests to fill gen ed, and the best bet if you've got somebody interested in CLEP is have them come to University College so we can look at what CLEP might work well for them and make sure they're aware of what the requirements are there. And we have a few students who come in with what's called an IB or International Baccalaureate degree. And again, that's a tricky one. So if you run into one of those, probably best to contact University College. Every time I get an IB student, I have to pull out my advisor manual and look up the rules because they're kind of different. So that pretty much covers it. And I'd be welcome to take any questions you have. I think we're about out of time for this segment, but feel free to contact me later if you do have some questions. Thanks.